Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Kernodle. While tense school board meetings over cultural and other issues have dominated education news headlines, instances of culture war battles in schools have declined by 42%, according to a new report from the CATO Institute. Joining me to dig into this is Chalkboard News editor Brennan Clary. Brennan, what is the idea behind this report and how long have they been following this data?
Yeah, so the idea behind the report is to try to figure out how many cultural battles were happening in schools, essentially culture wars. So that's the terminology that we sometimes use to describe like these conflicts around transgender notification policies or book removals, different kinds of things where you have people on different sides of cultural ideological spectrum, right? And they're arguing about these things, and they're doing that in the school board meeting, right? Or through different kinds of channels, complaining about the school board, to the school board about materials that are in the library, and then with that ideological view. And so we've seen a lot of that in recent years. And the CATO Institute has data going back to 2013. So they said there were 182 instances in 2013. And that stayed kind of steady until 2017, 2018, got up into the 200s, 250 by 2018. And then by 2021, it doubled. And so it was in the 440s. 2022 was 487 instances. In 2023 was 549. And in 2024, it dropped down to 321. So we're down 200 instances, which is that 42% drop that they're talking about. So it's kind of one of these the first good news that we've seen in terms of these intense conflicts, these the public school battle map, right? So that it's a very interesting trend, it kind of is some of the first good news, I think, in terms of a lot of this. We've done a lot of these podcast episodes. We've done a lot of writing at Chalkboard News about these kind of intense cultural fights over books, over different kinds of parental notification policies, different lawsuits, where you might have a conservative parent saying, like, I don't want my kid to learn about this because I disagree with it, or, have problems with this because of its ideological bent. So it is a very interesting and kind of one of the first looks at that. And interestingly, too, the report says that the latter half of 2024 was especially peaceful. So, in January, you had 67 incidents, and then by December, it's down to 20. And there's just kind of like a downward trend over the course of the year. And, a couple of different reasons for that, Neal McCluskey said, is maybe the end of the pandemic that cooled overall anger. It also could be because maybe there's fewer debates over masking or different kinds of, taxpayer funds that were left with that. Maybe people just got tired. That's another option that was floated. And then also the presidential election. So that's another thing is like maybe people were more upset about the trend of national politics than local ones. So maybe they wanted to kind of focus on that, and, move toward, trying to get their candidate elected. So there's a number of different reasons, I think, why that may have dropped, but it's a very interesting sort of, look into, some of these, the broader scope of some of these cultural debates.
There were a number of different types of instances that they looked at. There's different categories that they kind of grouped them into. And some of it was the question of reading materials, books, book removals, that kind of thing. So could you tell us a little bit about that and also how it compares to the data we've talked about from PEN America?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's three, top three categories in 2024 of these instances, right? And one of them was reading material. The three categories are reading material, curricula, and gender equity. So the CATO documented 77 instances of discrepancies with reading materials, 76 curriculum conflicts about ethnicity and sex, and 75 gender identity disputes ranging from access to bathrooms and locker rooms. So like those kinds of gender identity debates. And so with reading material in particular, it's a much lower level, much lower number than the PEN America figures. So in 2024, there were over 10,000 instances of book bans. That's the terminology that PEN America uses. We call them book removals because I think it's a little bit more accurate. Part of that, I think, is based on the definition that PEN America uses. So one of those is that if it's been removed from the shelves at any point, even if it's under review, they call it a book removal. So there are some state laws now that require school districts to remove all titles. And then they might go back on to the shelves after the review period is done, but they have to be removed during that time. So PEN America would count that. So I think that can sometimes inflate the overall number of book removals, book bans that PEN America is claiming. And so I think with these two, it'd be, you could have, the definition that CATO is using, I believe, is more focused on like the overall debate, right? So it could be, we're having maybe 18 books or 180 books even being challenged by one parent, and that could be like the cultural debate in that school district. So I think that there is more of that nationwide scope and on a number of different issues. It would be kind of impossible, I think, to get into that amount of specificity if you were also going to include the number of book titles, or like, kind of the nuances of each one of those. So I think that, it is a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison as well. But overall, PEN America is also claiming there was a 200% increase in the number of book bans, book removals over the previous school year, during the 2023-2024 school year, that there were 10,000 instances of book removal, and that's a 200% increase. So that doesn't really track with the CATO Institute's kind of cultural cooling. But then there are some states that passed laws that did, again, require that sort of review process. So I think it's a little bit more complicated than just like saying that. But I think, if you take the CATO report, I think it's still very interesting and maybe good news depending on how you look at it.
How does school choice factor into this?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting thing that Neal McCluskey from the CATO Institute brought up to our reporter. Essentially, he said that, these might actually drive more school choice, that you could, if you had conflict, then families would try to go to a place where they're not met with conflict from administrators. If they, for example, don't want to have a specific kind of book on the shelves, or they want different kinds of policies regarding gender identity or parental notification. And so I think that he said, that could be a big factor in the school choice, but, it'd have to be one of those things to really figure out how much of a role the cultural conflicts are having in that desire for school choice, based on putting some time in there, and then also some statistical work. That's what McCluskey said.
Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.